Hey friends, looking for some great business content other than right here on Accelerate? Then check out C-Suite TV and watch in-depth interviews with business content for C-Suite leaders and entrepreneurs, including an interview with me, your favorite podcast host. And it's all on demand. Watch and get insider secrets on demand by going to csuitetv.com. That's c-suitetv.com. Business insights on demand. Okay, let's do the show. It's time to accelerate. Hi, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 458 of Accelerate, where I hold, as you know, in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. All right, a couple quick items before we meet our guest today, who's David A. Fields. If you like this show, it would really help us out. Really help us out. If you could just take a minute, go to iTunes, subscribe to Accelerate. While you're there, leave us a quick review. It really helps out. We appreciate it. Also, love to hear from you. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions about topics or guests that you'd like me to feature on the show, then go over to accelerate.fm/suggestions and give me your suggestions. They're all welcome. We'll see what we can do to include those in our show. All right, now, friends, if you're looking for new ideas about how to amp up your sales, then go to accelerate.fm/spark and get my free ebook, How to Spark a Sales Turnaround. You know, it's based on my interviews with over 300 of the sales experts on this show, who asked them questions about what they would do to boost their sales if they were slumping. And I've compiled the recommendations into a practical step-by-step guide that you can use to accelerate your sales today. So don't wait. Go to accelerate.fm/spark to get your free copy of How to Spark a Sales Turnaround. Okay, I'm excited to be joined on the show today by David A. Fields. He's an author, speaker, and consultant. Most particularly, he's author of a book called The Irresistible Consultants' Guide to Winning Clients. Now, I really enjoyed reading his book, and it's more than just a book for consultants. It's really a good sales book. And if you're like me, and if you want to find out how to make yourself irresistible to buyers, then stick around. David A. Fields, welcome to Accelerate.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you. And so I love the title. So what is an irresistible consultant?
An irresistible consultant?
Yes.
Irresistible consultant is one that the client is saying, I need to have you. I want you to help me solve my problem. As opposed to, hey, let's get in an expert on lean. We need an operations guy. We need a sales training guy. We need, right? That could be anyone. Mm-hmm. When you're irresistible, they're saying, we need you. We need David. We need Andy. We need Tom or Sally. That's where you're trying to get to.
So how do you make yourself irresistible? And I know we're going to go through some steps in the book, but in general.
Well, that's a good question. The heart, I think, of being irresistible is actually can be summed up in one word, and that's discovery. And what I mean by that is consulting is not about the consultant. I tell consultants constantly, consulting is not about you. It's about them, the clients. And as long as you make it about the client, as long as you're constantly discovering what they need, paying attention to them, attending to them, discovering what their concerns are, you become irresistible. When you know the client better than anyone else, perhaps better even than the client knows themselves, they want to work with you. So I think that's the heart of it.
Well, and that applies to, and because we have a large sales audiences, we've got consultants and we've got a broad range of people listening, but we do have sales professionals and consultants fit into that mold as well. But that's something we keep talking about, being customer first, and it's about them, not about you. And interested in your opinion, it's why we're having to keep reinforcing this, right? I mean, you would think by now, in sales, this is just sort of be inculcated, right? Is it's not about you, it's about them. It's about being of service to someone else. It's not about pushing something. It's about being of service.
Right. We hear it all the time, but that doesn't mean we're good at it. It's actually, if you think about the core of discovery, then is listening. So if discovery is the core of becoming irresistible, then drill down one level more. It's listening. We've been listening and talking like you and I are doing right now, basically all our lives. But that doesn't mean we're particularly good at it. Often we practice bad habits. I was actually out with a firm not last week, the week before, we did a full day on what I call right side up thinking, which is putting the customer first and listening. That's all we did, just those two concepts the whole day. And they would have happily done another day, because it turns out these are actually very difficult skills. Thinking right side up, meaning putting someone else first, it is difficult. That's not natural.
Is it a skill or a habit?
It's both. It is both. I think it's something that you can learn and practice. And when you learn it and practice it, it becomes habit. But there's always pressure. There's always tension, because, for instance, salespeople they need to make a number. They're rewarded on driving business. And so there's a pressure to start thinking about themselves. What's my number? What do I need to do? What am I trying to accomplish here? What do I want to say? What are my objectives for the meeting? Right. So all that my language is very normal. It's very natural. Frankly, it's healthy. But for salespeople, and especially for consultants, which is where I play, it turns out to be backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I want to dig into. We'll start with think right side up, because it's as you said, sort of the core. But before I do, I do want to say I really liked the stick figures in your book.
Thank you.
And I mean, I'm a big fan. In fact, we just had Dan Rome on the show this week, and he wrote Draw to Win is his latest book,
yes.
And so on. And I know he would love your book as well. I mean, you did a great job with that. For my next book that I'm working on, I'm practicing trying to do those types of drawings, and not very well. But
well, it's scary. I mean, so for someone who's completely devoid of artistic talent like myself, I had to learn how to draw a stick figure. But I do draw all of those, and they're fun. And readers may enjoy them or may not, but frankly, I enjoy them. Some of them crack me up. And as an author, it's important to enjoy your own work.
It is, but I think for people that are listening and tempted to go out and buy your book, it helps. And the reason you do this to figures is it helps communicate the message. And yeah, you did a great job with that. So
thank you so much.
All right,
I appreciate that.
Just had to say that. So all right, you lay out 6 steps to become irresistible.
Yes.
Step 1, you mentioned before, think right side up.
Exactly.
And let's talk about that, because I do want to talk specifically about how you make that a habit, right? How do you put the other person first? Because when you read about how people change habits, right? There's habit change is a process. A habit is a process, and so there's a trigger. There's a process that you follow after the trigger, and or some sort of psychic reward that happens, or It could be tangible even. But so in the case of saying, look, as a consultant or as a salesperson, we go in and we talk about ourselves, the whole spray and pray type approach.
Yeah.
What are the triggers in your mind, and what knowing what the trigger is, what's the behavior that they could do differently to say, yeah, it's all about the customer, not about me?
Well, I think that it's interesting, because the idea right side up or customer first and all of that is it's a very sort of broad concept, and a little bit amorphous, a little bit hard to get a hold of. You get it, but what do you do with it? Which I think is sort of your question. And I'm a big believer in taking things to a very practical level. And really, the way you do it is just 1 or 2 habits at a time. So for instance, when you walk into a meeting, saying, Mr. Prospect or client or whomever, what are your goals for the meeting? What would make this successful for you? I have a couple of thoughts about where I'd wanted to go, but I want to hear what you want out of the meeting. Okay, that's a very simple practice. And if you do that every time, it starts to become habit.
Well, and I would say in that case, you've, again, getting very practical, as you said, is you get the start of a meeting, start of a call, usually the customer or the client says something, right? So what do you do? Or, what do you want to tell me? That then becomes a trigger, because for a lot of times with salespeople, they think, oh, they're inviting me to talk about myself.
Right.
Well, really what the best response is just what you talked about, is to turn it back and say, well, no, what would you like to achieve in this meeting, or some other question that's appropriate for that situation.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be able to do it, obviously, delicately. People don't love it if they actually don't feel listened to if they say, so what do you do? Well, I'll tell you about that, but first tell me what you do, right? That actually doesn't work so well, because that shows you're not listening. Oddly enough, that's not being right side up. You went in with an agenda. Your agenda was, I want to ask the questions. And that's what makes this actually so hard and takes so much practice, is you do have to leave your agenda behind. And if a prospect says, well, tell me a little bit about what you do, then it does help to offer, not go into some long soliloquy and 15-minute explanation, but a one line, here's the problem that I solve. And here's the type of people I solve it for. Well, that explanation of what you do is actually right side up. You're saying, here's the problem I solve, not what I do, but the problem that people I work with have. And then the person you're talking to will either say, hey, I got that problem. Maybe you can help me. Or they'll say, I never have that problem. And you say, well, that's terrific. Let's talk about, just have a nice conversation, and then we'll go on our merry ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great approach. It's very, very simple, right? I like that the phrase says, leave your own agenda behind, because I'm sure consultants, when they get in their own sales training, business development training, salespeople certainly is you're told you have to have an agenda for the call.
Right.
Which is, as you're saying, is the absolute wrong thing to do. You got to be responsive to the client. You
have to be responsive to the client. And in our business especially, you have to build relationships. And that is a place where I diverge, I think, from a little bit, just in terms of emphasis from some approaches, because I'm all about the relationship. And so I see, if we have a conversation, if you and I were to talk, and all we did was touch base and talk about how you're moving from lower Manhattan to Midtown or Upper East Side, to me that's a success, because we've built a relationship. Mm-hmm. Now maybe that will turn into something, maybe it won't. I'm not overly concerned about it. But what I do know is that relationships themselves have value. Therefore, any conversation where you're focusing on the other person and building that relationship creates value. Ultimately, you need to monetize that. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to do that. But if you're sweating the agenda, if you're pushing the business as opposed to building and nurturing the relationship, it makes our jobs much, much harder.
We had a really good point in that section of the book about self-confidence, which again was a different perspective on it. And you say that, and this I think might be a quote, but you say you boost your self-confidence by reflecting less on yourself and more on the target's problems and aspirations.
Yes.
And that is a very different way for people to look at it from a sales perspective, is to say, wow, I think I can boost my self-confidence by increasing my knowledge about what we do, but it's really the opposite, right? I'm going to increase my self-confidence by being more familiar with what they do.
That's exactly right. I mean, I'm sure all the therapists and psychologists will take me to task, because they teach all about introspection and being in touch with yourself and how good you are to build your self-confidence. And I think that's all completely backwards. It's thinking about yourself that takes away your confidence. Just focus on the other person. Just focus on what they want. Well, if you know what your prospect wants, that's all you need. And you can be confident in that. If you pay attention to what they think of you, and most of the time we're harder on ourselves than other people are.
Absolutely.
So if we talk to our clients and the clients are saying, I love your work, I think you're outstanding, or I love your products. That's where you get your self-confidence. You don't need it from internally. In fact, you tend not to trust it internally. So, I'm sure from a psychologist standpoint that's backwards. But from a sales standpoint, a business building standpoint, it's absolutely right. You get it all from the outside. It's all right side up.
Yeah, and you talk about, instead of focusing on your anxieties, focus on their anxieties. Because they have them, right? I mean, person you're talking to, if they've got some goal they're trying to achieve, or something that needs to be resolved, they're anxious about it. It could be an impact on their career, their job satisfaction. They've got those anxieties. Let yours go.
You bet. And if they're considering buying your service, if they're considering buying your product, that decision is fraught with risk, and it comes with additional anxiety. What if I choose the wrong product? What if I choose the wrong consultant? What if I choose the wrong vendor? What if it goes wrong? What if it costs too much? What if it takes too long? What if my boss doesn't like it? And, all these things. And these decisions are risky. And as a result, to the extent, first of all, you understand which of those anxieties are the ones that's most plaguing your prospect, you can then relieve the anxiety. You can address it head on. And that goes back to, that's how you become irresistible.
Yeah. I love the perspective. And so a question would be is how do you coach people then to sort of let go of themselves? When you're working with consultants and to build their self-confidence. What is, again, we're talking about sort of habit change or behavior change and habit formation. What's sort of the trigger there?
Well, there's a how, I suppose, and what's the trigger? The how, we actually, when I work with consultants, which obviously I do all day, we just actually take real client situations. So I tend to, right after this call, obviously I'll be working with a consultant who I've been working with for 4 years now, and she runs a great firm, and we will literally just take a meeting that's coming up and we'll role play it. What are you going to say? She goes through it, and that gives me an opportunity to say, what if instead of saying, here's how you need to run your board, because she works with boards, I say, you instead ask, what's going on with your board right now? I say, oh yeah, you're right. I forgot. That's right. That's right. Set up. Right. So it's just, like I said, it's very tactical and practical in practicing little things one at a time that get you in the habit of asking questions. And to be fair, this consultant I've been working with for some time, she's very good at it now.
Well, I think the key is for people in that situation is, and this is something I stress constantly on the show and with the guests, is you got to be in the moment. You got to be present.
Yes.
Right? This whole idea of mindfulness and eliminating distractions and being really focused, that's really central to what you're talking about.
You bet. And you know what? It helps to be interested in other people.
Yes.
And I say that, which is funny. I am not naturally, sort of born interested in other people.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, though.
Yeah. Well, but I cultivated it.
Right.
So what I realized is I have to become interested in other people if I'm going to put them first. And so I cultivated that habit. And now I'm fascinated by other people. Right? I find everyone else genuinely interesting. And as a result, it's very easy to pay attention to them. It's very easy to ask, what's going on with you? Even before we started the recording here, you and I had a little bit of a conversation, and that's probably what we did first, right? I started asking questions about what you do in your podcast and all of that, because I'm genuinely interested. But and I guess the reason I said I'm not naturally that way is I want to encourage people who also are not naturally interested in other people to be open with yourself about it and realize, guess what? You can change that. And when you change it, a whole world opens up to you. Not just a world of success, which is true. You'll be much more successful in sales, much more successful in consulting. It's just this great world opens up to you. It's not about you. It's about the other 5 billion people or whatever it is on the planet.
Yeah, well, there's sort of two things that are really interesting about that. One is there was a something I was reading just recently who wrote it was saying that one of the most powerful things, this may have been even based on some research studies that have been done, is that you can do, and this is train yourself to do. This becomes your trigger when you first start meeting with the customer. You sit down, and there's this pregnant pause. Who's going to go first? Is ask them, so how are you doing? Not how are things going with your business, how are things, just how are things, but how are you doing?
Yeah, I like that.
And what happens is several things. One is, you've asked an authentic question. directed at that person. And they're gonna tell you. You're gonna learn a lot. I think this is a great training thing for people is, how are you doing? But then also what happens is they begin to think that, well, wow, this person's really interested in me. And you are, because once you practice it, you're doing it sincerely. It's not just you're throwing it away. You're asking the question, how are you doing? And as more recent research has shown, is that, always talk about people buy from people they know, like, and trust. Well, actually, there's a fourth one there. It's like, meaning people are more likely to buy from people they think like them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, right. So
this is a great way to begin to sort of evince that in your conversation.
Oh, you bet. I think in the book I have what I call the 6 pillars of consulting success: know, like, trust, need, want, and value.
Mm-hmm. Right. Those are good.
And part of, so the emotional pillars, like and trust and want, but especially like and trust, a lot of the way you build that is by paying attention to the other person, right? They want to know that you like them. They want to know that you're attending to them. And when you do that, people genuinely like other people who seem to pay attention to them. So, who think that they're interesting. So if you think the other person's interesting, guess what? They'll like you because they think you like them.
Exactly. Makes a big difference. And people tend to overlook that. And that's why the reasons I think that we see in the research that really that extroverts don't tend to perform as well as people think they do relative to introverts, or actually those that have encompassed both apparently, perform the best. But is that, it's all about them. Even though you're an extrovert, it's really all about you. Your extroversion is all about you. So, it's something for people to sort of think about. So interesting. Okay. So second step you had, which I wanted to get into, we don't have time to go through all 6, but was maximize impact.
Yep.
Find your killer offering. You talk about fishing where the fish are.
You bet.
So maybe that seems evident on the surface, but talk about that a little bit.
Well, it does seem evident on the surface, but you'd be surprised how many firms I walk into. I sketched out what I call the Sextrent chart, and I go, oh my gosh. So basically, I'd say for anyone listening, think about, I'm a consultant, so I can boil the world down to these 2x2 charts, but because I'm super fancy, I'll make it a 2x3 chart.
2x3. So people knew that the Sextrent was actually, an extension of the quadrant into two more boxes. Yes,
exactly. 2 more boxes. So on what I put on the vertical axis is just awareness. Is your prospect aware that they have the problem that you solve? And at the top, I say yes. At the bottom, I say no. And then across the top, I ask another question, which is, how urgent is solving this problem for the prospect? And all the way on the left, I have, not at all. And in the middle, it's sort of, well, maybe in the future they want to solve it. And over on the right, I say the urgency is high. It's right now. And that top right box, which is where they're aware of the problem and they want to solve it right now, that's fishing where the fish are. That's who you want to play with, because that business is easy to win. And being, I suppose, fundamentally, I don't want to say lazy, but fundamentally, I like to, not work harder than I need to win business. I'll go where it's easy to win. And it's easy to win business from people who know they have a problem that you solve and want to solve it right now. And I find too many consultants, too many salespeople are trying to create demand. They're trying to convince someone, you need to solve this now. That is hard work. I mean, that's a hard sell. And then they wonder, well, gosh, I submitted a proposal. Why isn't it closing? Well, it's not closing because you tried to convince the prospect that they need the solution now. But then when you left the office, when you were away and they had time to consider it, they talked to their colleagues, they realized, gosh, maybe there's not so much urgency. And so that turned out to be spinning your wheels for nothing. So yeah, for a lot of firms, this is actually an eye-opener. I think, oh yeah, you know what? We are spending a ton of time with prospects who are not hungry fish. So let's just, cut our losses and go elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that when you look at the sort of close rates of orders across the entire business-to-business sphere, that most people are doing that, right? And we see close rates in the 20% range in business to business. In some cases, maybe up to 40%. But I mean, it's well below 50. So sort of by definition, unless we're assuming we lose all those to competition, but I think that's not the case. Most deals are lost to no decision. So we're selling to people that just aren't ready to buy.
Absolutely. The biggest competition, certainly for consulting, and I'm sure for other kinds of sales, the biggest competition is inertia.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways to overcome it. There are ways to increase urgency, and there are ways to increase awareness of a problem. But that takes a little bit more work. And then for consultants, the second biggest competition is internal staff. But inertia is a big one. And so why spend so much time trying to fight it?
Well, sometimes you say that you need to change ponds. I mean, we extend the fishing analogy.
Yes.
So by that, you're saying find people that want to buy what you're selling. Well,
no, actually I don't.
No?
I'm saying almost the exact opposite. So what I tell folks is it's a heck of a lot easier to sell what people want to buy than to find people who want to buy what you're trying to sell.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I work with a consulting firm that was focused on the outdoor sports industry. And to be honest, they were struggling a little bit, which isn't unusual. That's, firms often come to me either when they want to accelerate growth or when they're struggling. Well, this group was struggling. So, we took a look at it and realized the outdoor sports industry just was not a good industry for the problem that they solved. And so they had two choices. They could either find out, well, what industry does want what we solve, or they could look at another industry or the outdoor sports industry and say, what problems do they have? And they did a little bit of both. They said, you know what? In general, this turns out not to be a very rich industry for consultants. Who else can we reach? And then what problems do they have that we can solve? And that's worked out fabulously well for them.
And they started, though, in the outdoor sports industry.
They started in the outdoor sports industry. They're now actually in the small manufacturing that folks that supply goods to Amazon and other online businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Because they could reach that industry, and then in talking to them, they found there's a need. And that need is something they can address, which was frankly a little bit different from what they were doing for the outdoor sports industry.
So what was their expertise and that they then went and marketed to this other industry?
Well, their expertise is founded on some, lean methodology and a certain application of that. And look, I mean, most of what we do isn't super specific skill sets. I mean, some of it is, but most of us aren't trained in neuroscience, and therefore we have a tough time going into carpentry. It's you know what I mean? I mean,
sure.
There's skill sets that are either fairly transferable or you can learn, and it's much easier and better to pick up skill sets because that you can do. What you can't do is create client problems, or at least you're not supposed to. So if it turns out that what you solve and where you want to solve it isn't particularly lucrative, again, you can beat your head against the wall, which was kind of what they were doing. Mm-hmm. Or you can say, you know what, maybe I can transfer some of my skills if there's another industry that does hire consultants and does have a problem that they urgently want to solve that I can solve. And that's what we did. And the business is, doubled or tripled.
Very interesting. Which is, applies to sales as well. I mean, you can find yourself successful or unsuccessful in one industry and actually find that your skills are very applicable to another industry. And, it's really a challenge, I think, for sales professionals to say, yeah, what's the right fit for me?
Yeah, it is. And it's very challenging for companies. Now, I will say that, when you're an established company, whether it's you're selling products or consulting, you find it really difficult to make that shift. That sort of basic value proposition. Again, I'm working with a group in the Midwest right now that we're attacking that right now, and it's difficult. they've got about a $25 million consulting business. So it's boutique, but it's enough so that they've built up a pretty steady client base. And to grow, they have to leave their current value proposition behind. And that's a tough shift to make.
Scary.
But, all right, it is scary. But you know what? They're going to make it, and it's going to work out well for them. They can see it. I can see it. It's just getting over the hump. And they'll do that.
Yeah. Well, and that's a journey that sales professionals, anybody selling a product or service confronts at some point, right? There is this hump to get over. Sometimes it's, coming into a new market, identifying the right niches, finding where you fit, finding what people are willing to pay for. I mean, with consultants, that's always one of the big challenges, right? As we talked about. What are people willing to pay for?
You bet. I mean, my business, my consulting business, not the work I do for consultants, the work I do for corporate clients, is completely different from what I was trained to do in my first decade of business in corporate. I grew up in consumer products. And when I went into consulting, I went to a firm that focused on consumer products because that's what my background was. When I started my own firm or co-founded my own firm, we left that entirely because we found that the market was asking for something different. And rather than sticking with what we did, right, which is really self-definition, it's upside down, we decided we're going to go where the market is. That's right side up. And that proved to be a good decision.
It would be a good decision. Well, good. Well, David, we've run out of time for today, but I want to thank you for being on the show. And tell folks how they can connect with you and learn more about what you do.
Oh, well, davidafields.com will take folks to my site, whether they're on the consulting side or on the corporate side, because I still do both. That's the easiest way. If anybody has a question, I'm always happy to chat with folks. And I'm at davidafields.com. And of course, obviously, if people pick up the book, I think they'll enjoy it. And then we can have conversations after that.
Great. And that book, again, is The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients. So, again, David, thank you very much for being on the show.
It was an absolute delight.
My pleasure. And friends, thank you for spending this time with us today. Remember, please join us again tomorrow. Until then, I'd really appreciate if you got a moment, go to iTunes, subscribe, leave a review for Accelerate. We really want to hear what you have to say, good or bad. And thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everybody.